Is it now for me?
So, give me a moment here. So, we want to welcome Dr. Souad
Benromdhane.
Sorry for mangling that.
It's very, it's understood.
But she currently works for the OAQPS Health and Environment Impact Division. She's a senior environmental engineer and risk assessor at the Risks and Benefits Group, leading the VOC Exemption program, which is related to the rulemaking of the revision of EPA's definition of VOCs, as well as heading a work group of experts on HAPs and other toxic pollutants. Subject matter expert on VOC exemptions from the definition, which will definitely be very good as we're working on the N-propyl bromide addition of HAPs and a few other things. As an exposure and risk assessor, she has extensively worked on health impacts from criteria pollutants during the NAAQS reviews and several other items there. So we certainly appreciate you joining us today and being able to talk to us about exemptions from definition of VOCs.
Thank you so much. I wanted really to value this invitation to meet with the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, in particular, the technical subcommittee. It will be my pleasure to talk today about the regulatory definition of VOC, and as you will probably figure that out later, it's very specific to EPA. I wouldn't pretend to be a chemist today. I have a lot of chemistry background as an environmental engineer, but hopefully I will be at least able to answer some of, I think, the questions around this program from the regulatory point of view. I intend to, hopefully I can get through to the next slide. If I can't get to the next slide for some reason. Now all of them. Here we are. I wanted to cover, a little bit of background on a few points related to the exemption. Some history, because as you will figure out later, that this program has started long time ago. It's almost like with the starting with EPA in 1977. Very quickly, through a simplistic, I think, definition of what VOC for the lay people or regular people when they go to our website. However, the regulatory definition is much more, even though it is, I think, broader than people may expect. I will talk a little bit about the policy and some of the criteria for our decision making, some of the metrics as well, because they kept evolving. The exemption program has been really a process in progress. It's evolving every time with different challenges that we are meeting with the rulemaking. I'll give you a little bit about our status. I may not be able to talk about what is really now in the pipeline, but just a heads up on at least what is kind of ready to go for the rulemaking. Some questions that may be arising around what kind of impacts any exemption may have, whether on the industry or the environment on the other side. And I will give you also some key I think, points that some people may have to consider when they are submitting a petition. Then I will conclude with the summary and will be hopefully ready to answer some of your questions. As I said, I won't pretend to be able to answer all chemistry questions, but I will try as best as I can. So to start with a very quick overview, I think, in my opinion, and not a lot of people agree with me, that this program has been really triggered by an attempt from EPA to help federal, state, and local, I think, plans to help them with meeting the ozone NAAQS. Generally, we know that VOC emissions, they really contribute to formation of ozone, and many states, they tend to look at where they can, leverage with the emissions of VOC. So the idea is to focus on very specific aspects of the VOC, not like the vapor or other criteria of what the chemical is, but we're going to, as I will demonstrate in the definition, we are looking at very specific criteria like the photochemical reactivity of a VOC, which will be also very specific to a reaction with the hydroxyl OH. So with the intent, of course, to reduce the formation of ozone, as the end goal is to minimize exposure to these chemical and in particular ozone. And finally, I think it is a very good incentive to the industry to come up with new chemicals, which is the case. Now they are coming with alternatives to chemicals that are more harmful, or they have other unwanted aspects like global warming potential or things like that. So as I said, the program started in 1977 and it was pretty much triggered by EPA. There were no petitions at the time. I was looking at the history to prepare actually a white paper about this. Why? Because some people were asking who really starts this process. And I said it could be EPA as it was in the beginning, because as a response, for example, to the request of the National Academy of Science and some studies in 77, they wanted to look at some of the chemicals they could eliminate either because they were no longer there or they were not as important because they were not used anymore or phased out. However, currently, most of the requests are made by the industry, either manufacturing new chemicals or they have older ones that they want to see drop because they have somehow some evidence that they are less reactive than ethane. The first few chemicals that were done in 77, it was among them, of course, ethane, and that pretty much worked as a threshold. It was the bright line that EPA decided it's going to be like, this is the measuring point. We want to compare all the other chemicals to this particular one. And we waited until almost 2005 to have the interim guidance. And as its name is stated, it's still interim. We were never able to finalize it, maybe because there is no particular interest in doing that at the moment, and maybe because of lack of resources, whether it is human resources or finances, as this program is voluntary. It added actually few elements to the original criteria that were very simple in the beginning. As I said, it's reactivity only that was determined by a rate of reaction to the hydroxyl OH. However, the interim guidance, when it came in 2005, and as I will show a little bit in the history later, it was triggered by, I think, other aspects like toxicity in particular, because we figured at some point that even some of the chemicals that were exempted, they came to become hazardous air pollutants later after IRIS assessment. And that kind of put the process a little bit in controversy. How do we exempt HAPs? And this is actually one of EPA's now current policies, not to exempt any of the hazardous pollutants based on toxicity finding. So it was triggered by TBAC at the time because somehow one of the byproducts in the chain of reaction to form ozone was toxic. And we still don't have a final word on it. And it even was for the first time subject to reporting and record keeping. It was the only actually VOC that was subject to that. And that was also added to the definition, as I will show it a little later. I think this is a slide, as I said, for everybody, just to understand how we look at VOCs in this very specific regulatory process. We have thousands of VOCs. Anybody who's familiar, I think, with Speciate as the database that EPA store all, chemicals information, has among maybe VOCs around maybe 4,000 of them that are profiled. We all know that VOC in the presence of nitric oxide, it creates ozone in very specific environmental condition like sunlight. So depending on the reactivity of each chemical, you will see faster or slower reaction to the hydroxyl OH, and then in the end, higher or lower that is produced. I will discuss the regulatory definition in slide 8, just to tell you how broad it is and how it leaves open to so many other, I think, development in this guidance. The policy and our criteria, as you maybe some of you know, that it is covered under the 40 CFR 51100 that established the definition under the Clean Air Act. And it was, as I said in the beginning, mainly geared towards helping states with the SIP or the State Implementation Plans program, and being able to account for more, I think, controversial VOCs than, the one that have lower reactivity. It has been EPA's policy, honestly, to somehow exclude all the ones that are lower in reactivity with OH, but as I said, later we went and added another criteria, which is the maximum incremental reactivity, which shows the final stage of ozone formation and how much of it is made. However, when I think states are taking advantage of this, I think, program, they still they are not obligated to exclude, from control the VOCs that are exempted, but also they cannot take credit for them if they consider them for control. So that's the end result of an exemption, is you can never account for those VOCs anymore as a way of showing your reduction of VOCs emission to meet the standard. In the beginning, I think ethane was the clear cut. It was the bright line that each chemical will have to meet. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to that expectations because of multiple issues. As I said, the chemical could be very low reactivity, but it could be a toxic, like a HAP, or it could be low reactivity, but it really, in the end, slowly it is forming much more ozone than others that are less reactive than that chemical. So this is why the interim guidance came out in 2005 to add other aspects like toxicity, like whether the chemical has gone through a SNAP review. I tend personally to wait for that finding to make sure that the chemical has been accepted for specific end uses. And that's something that I need also to explain to anybody who's looking for an exemption, to understand that the exemption will also be linked to that very specific end use. So it won't be exempted for all. It will be exempted for all the accepted uses in the SNAP review. We tend also to let go of the ones that we decided for earlier, because if they are now regulated in another program, then we don't worry about it. We don't have to go and take them down up to the list because they became HAPs. But we will not exempt another HAP if we know at the time it was having that status. So we kind of work in tandem with other programs, making sure that these aspects are covered by other EPA's program. Our current situation, when I show you the list later, you will see we have probably about 68 chemicals, including some groups. Sometimes some ruling was made for a whole group of chemicals together because of similar characteristics. Currently, I have about 10 pending petitions with different status. Some of them were held by the petitioner themselves when I tried to talk them out of, pushing for the exemption, because I knew it is not going to be smoothly going through the process of review by the work group and all the experts we have because of particular issues. So they decided to withhold it themselves. We have few that are halted by OAQPS for some reasons that I cannot talk about right now. And of course, some chemicals have some controversial, I think, aspects like some pesticides in the agricultural activities are problematic, and we are still ongoing discussion about whether to consider them for exemption or not. This is the list of the latest rulemaking that we have. They should be available in the website, as I will show you later. These also are some of the one I worked on particularly. So I wrote these rules personally, and I know them much more than many others in the list. We have one that is in the making. We are currently waiting for the SNAP review. It will be coming in August to me for review, and of course the rest of the team and the group we have that reviews the SNAPs, but I won't be able to make a decision until I see the findings of SNAPs, whether it's toxicity or acceptability for specific uses. They have another isomer that may be also viable for exemption, and it is ongoing discussion whether it will have a SNAP or not. We don't know yet. So the current chemical we're working on is the HFO 1336 MZZE. We just published in 2018 the Z1, and we're going to be working on the E sometime soon. Now, just a little bit of detail on the criteria. As I said early on, and until probably the acetone issue, we worked on using comparisons related or based on the KOH, which, as I said, it's the speed with which any of these chemicals reacts with the hydroxyl OH. And here, just I want to probably remind people who are maybe more savvy about the chemistry and the mechanism with which I think ozone gets formed. It's a whole chain of reaction, and this is the first reaction in this whole set of reaction to form ozone. And I think that's why adding the maximum incremental reactivity ratio is very important for two reasons. The first, it started giving us information about how much ozone is formed in the end. Because as I said, the chemical could be very fast in reacting, but it stops, like, for example, AMP. That's something I worked on and defended very, very well. We made the case for it because it really was the subject of so many studies, and it showed that in the end it doesn't form much ozone despite its very fast reactivity with OH in the beginning. The other aspect of why KOH and MIR together now, we are trying to strike a balance between the basis of the molar basis or the molecular basis in the KOH consideration and the molar basis that is, and the gram basis, sorry, that is considered in the MIR. And as you see, MIR could be calculated in molar basis or gram basis, but the interim guidance states particularly to use the gram basis to kind of achieve that balance between the KOH being expressed in molecular basis and then the MIR in the gram basis. The gram basis also has some merit because I think this is what I hear from the industry. Most chemicals are sold in liquid states, so they are most likely to be measured in grams or kilos or pounds. Versus, when we talk about air pollution, we are always looking at, molar basis in general. Just a little bit about the interim guidance, so at least you can have an excerpt of what's written there specifically so you can see how broad the definition is. And I'm going to read on the definition first. As you see, I will show it in the web later so you can see the full document or the regulatory document. As it is defined here, it is talking about volatile compounds as any compound of carbon excluding monoxides, carbon dioxide, carbonic acid, metallic carbide, or carbonates, and ammonium carbonates, which participate in atmospheric photochemical reactions. And as you see, this leaves it open to any chemical. And I get very interesting questions like, is styrene a VOC, or is urea a VOC? And my answer will be, it is a VOC as long as it is not in the list of exempted chemicals. Of course, there's more to it to explain, but I make it like a shortcut for people so they can figure that out. In this regulatory definition, there is one section that used to be there, and this is the 5 section where we are introducing this record keeping and reporting of the emissions of a specific chemical. It was added specifically when TBAC was under review, and they wanted to make sure that we have at least information about this chemical because they were anticipating it may be toxic. Right now, it is inexistent, and you will go to section 5 and you find just under reserve. We dropped it in 2016 when we finalized TBAC rule. So this to come back to the interim guidance, given us that balance I was talking about, we are always comparing any chemical to ethane on a mass basis strictly, but the interim guidance is trying really, as I said, to bring that to play where you are having not only how fast the chemical is reacting to form ozone, but whether it forms ozone in the end, and then trying to have a mixture between these two metrics in gram and molar basis. The interim guidance adds also 2 other aspects, as I will talk about them later in the policy, which are toxicity issues. So these chemicals have to go through thorough assessment, whether through the SNAP review or other programs. And I can tell you, for example, one of them has the status of a HAP under IRIS. It most likely is not going to make it for exemption. The global warming potential was also introduced as we figured many of the chemicals we exempted. At some point, we were able to calculate or find their global warming potential, and they were in very high end. So now we started looking at that very closely, and we are trying to keep it really under control with all of the chemicals that were phased out because of their high global warming potential. Some of the questions, as I said in the beginning, that could be coming out, and we had them in some of the chemicals. I think it's what are the differential impacts that we anticipate, whether from regions who are trying to, plan their SIPs, or from a policy perspective and how it impacts on people or the environment. And I don't want to go into the details of specific cases, but I'm going to give an example, for example, of regional exceptions where some regions may be using a chemical to show when they are planning their SIPs to show drops in those emissions, and they use VOCs really to take advantage of that benefit to demonstrate that they are doing something about it. And many of the VOCs that we are talking about are actually maybe useful to them to be used. So if they are exempted, that particular benefit will drop from their radar. So they won't be able to use it, as I said before, because you cannot take the advantage or the benefit of reducing VOCs if they are exempt and they are no longer considered of high reactivity. The environmental justice issue happened in few cases where some of the pesticides, for example, or the fumigants, they were used in particular regions and they were impacting particular, I think, category of people, and that triggered some, environmental justice assessment that could also play into the decision making to exempt a chemical. Other reaction, I think, that we may see are generally coming from the environmental groups. For a long time, we haven't seen any of that. I think in this latest administration, we started seeing some move about it. And this actually triggered our switch or shift from earlier in this process. The rulemaking was actually a direct final with a parallel proposal, which made the process a little faster and easier, which, if I may explain for people who don't know what I'm talking about, when you have an action or a rulemaking, you can, usually you are putting a proposal and waiting for comment and finalizing for the final. In this case, because these rules are not major rules, and we thought in the beginning they could go with no comment, we worked with parallel proposals that will be considered pretty much with a direct final as final if no comments were coming in. Honestly, lately we started having comments and we stopped doing that. Now every action will have to go through a proposal, wait for the 2 months for the public comments, and then come back to finalize it and answer to the comment on the final ruling. And as I said, the other aspect could arise depending. Each chemical that comes to our office has its own criteria, its own aspects and own challenges, because not a single chemical is like the other one. I think environmental, as the risk assessment is considered to be something that we have no resources to do it ourselves, and we rely generally on the SNAP program as well as the environmental justice assessment as well, if there are any that are needed. Now let's go very quickly. I hope I am not over my time limit, to see. Pretty much I'm recapping how the process goes on. We still continue to look, I think, for better chemicals. So they generally bring them to us after, as I said, a SNAP is done, which shows that these chemicals are good alternatives for, less environmentally friendly chemicals. We are somehow concerned with the quantities, as I said, because we dropped this reporting and record keeping. We try to ask about their expectations of any increase or any problematic accumulation, especially if we are not very clear about toxicity and what are the impact on health and the environment later on. So that's why EPA in the end really kind of keeps that discretion on stopping any chemical from being exempted, as I said, and that's why we have few on hold right now. The photochemical reactivity for ozone has been a little bit problematic because of this. While we are trying to strike this balance between the VOH and the MIR, sometimes we do accept a chemical that has high speed in reactivity in the beginning, but it doesn't produce much ozone, and we try really to build the case for that. And sometimes it's the opposite. And I have been honestly successful lately when I was given the opportunity to negotiate with the industry to get them to kind of understand why, for example, a chemical has been there sitting for 15 years and no decision was made on it, because there are some concerns about whether it's toxicity or high reactivity. And as I show here, I was able to pretty much get the industry to withdraw a couple of chemicals in the last 3 or 4 years. GMS is one of them, and MPHA were dropped by the petitioners. Other factors continue to play in, as if you have a chance to go through the guidance and you will see what other aspect we consider. It takes me to, as I said, very easily toxicity issues have been problematic, because we found out that some of the chemicals that were exempt at some point became HAPs became problematic. And even if they had, very low photochemical reactivity, or they didn't form much ozone, um, as a new, I think, stage for this process, we do not want to exempt HAPs if we know about them. So unless we don't have evidence, or we are, clear that they don't present really any harm to health or the environment. Sometimes we may also let go of some chemical if we know that they are dealt with properly with other programs. So there's no reason for them to be exempted. For example, if I talk about a HAP, it's nicely regulated under other programs, so we don't even kind of discuss. We just say, this is not going to go through. We're not going to exempt it. And one of the, I think, newest probably criteria we use, it's in the climate change mitigation. I think this program has been somehow, as I said, geared towards this incentive for the industry to bring in better chemicals. And one of the other criteria that is becoming really very important is this high global warming potential. So sometimes we see things in the 500 or 14,000, and many of the petitioners argue that because you have previous cases and you exempted chemicals at whatever 10,000 global warming potential, why you're not doing that? And I thought this is really a good place to try to convince the industry that there are alternatives, and we don't have to continue to do the same thing. If science has, better evidence and we have better options, we don't have to accept these chemicals. Here I get to the summary. As I said, we continue to respond to petitions. Right now, EPA didn't have any particular initiatives when it comes to this program. We are thinking about maybe finalizing the interim guidance. I wasn't able or successful in convincing them yet, but I think based on what we have today and the available information, our decisions are still looking into alternatives. So if there are chemicals there that are better than anything that has been in use for very specific purposes, and the manufacturer come in with evidence to show that, then we are ready to assess the chemical and revise the definition. However, if I think EPA thinks about updating the interim policy, these are the different, I think, points that I think will be primary in tackling, like reviewing, I think, the basis for decision on previously exempted chemical, which means we may or may not take them out of the list of delisted VOCs. We also will continue, I think, to exempt these chemicals for one specific purpose, which is help the reduction of forming ozone. However, I think given the interim guidance we have in place right now, EPA still can reserve, that judgment on whether to grant or not based on other aspects, like if we determine that the VOC is increased in use, for example. I mean, if we continue to do exemption the way we are doing it, then you can be looking for problems with accumulation of maybe big quantities of VOCs that, when alone, maybe not that reactive and maybe not forming that much ozone, but when you put them all together, you may be having considerable amounts of ozone formation from VOCs. The other aspect I think we continue to look at is, of course, the health impact. And if we figure out sometime that an exempted chemical became a HAP, I personally would recommend that that chemical should be taken down from the list to help with, I think, limiting the use of HAPs. That's pretty much all what I have. I wanted to give you maybe a little bit of insight on some of the links for you to use. I know it's not a straightforward, bright line where to find them, and I want to show you actually where to get them. There's, I think the major link will be under ground level of ozone and pollution, and this is under www.epa.gov. The other two, I think, important links are the one for the interim guidance, and the other one is for the definition. The link I put there, it's generally up to date by the date, and if there is any changes in it, you will see it after, of course, the FR notice is out, because it triggers the change or the review of the definition of VOC. That's pretty much all what I have. I want to thank you for listening. I hope I didn't bore you. And if we have any questions, I can answer them, or I try to answer them. As I said, I'm not a chemist, so forgive me if I can't answer any harder questions that are related to organics. But I promise I can look into them and get back with you with some answers. Otherwise, if we have some time, I can switch to the website and show you where these links are for future use. I'm going to now give it back to the organizers. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Dr. Benromdhane. We did have at least one comment and a little bit of discussion on it related to this. Melissa in Mississippi was talking about it may be difficult for environmental justice communities that may be in opposition to the VOC exemptions to find out what an industry's VOC pollutants might be, especially if those VOCs are considered exempt and would not necessarily be reported. Is there some method that they might be able to identify what that could be? Would it show up on the EJ screen?
Should I go to the EJ screen?
That would certainly be a good help there. But if they are not including them on their permits or reporting them, would they show up there?
I think my understanding of VOCs are, they have an inventory for VOCs, so nothing is escaping from, I think, being reported. It's just once they are exempted, before, there is still actually a section, I'm trying to find where I talked about the check. There's a section that talks about the possibility of bringing that back. The EJ will come up at any time, so it's something that will be triggered during the public comment. So every time we have a rule, it goes out, and environmentalists or states, here we are, environmentalists or states can come back with issues. I'll give you maybe one chemical. I don't want to talk about it particularly, but it is triggering that. This is methyl bromide. I think right now it is on hold, and it has some aspects of environmental justice issues. And it will be considered and assessed. And as I said, generally, it's not our program that starts that aspect of it. I think the SNAP program starts it. Because they have to look at those aspects, as environmental justice is a part of any ruling now. So you have to check and prove that there is no issues with it. I'm not sure if that is the answer to the question, but if I didn't, please clarify a little more.
I think Melissa further thought it might be a nice proactive approach if EPA was able to identify the industries that qualify for the exemptions. When I'm doing permitting or assistance and such in Tennessee, if a item shows up as a VOC exempt based on our SIP, which mostly follows the EPA as far as I'm aware. I don't even include that as a listed, or I don't even include it in the VOC calculations, and it's not, unless it is a specific HAP, it's not directly listed. So I
Right,
don't know.
because I think because, as I said, you cannot benefit from an exempted chemical. You can still do control of it if you want, but that one, the idea here is for that to the SIP to, I think, focus on more problematic VOCs that are higher in reactivity than of wasting time on putting the smaller one. But I think when there are environmental justice issues, they will show up from early in the process. We don't wait until we see them coming in you know, public comments. They will, because this is something I wanted to add. While I am single-handed in this program, I do everything from tutoring to writing to answering to OMB in the beginning to, you know, authoring the rule and then meeting with the work group. But the work group is awesome. I have a full array of experts and scientists from different offices in EPA, whether it's OAP, OP, or OGC, and other offices that are, I think, dealing with other issues like atmospheric impacts and things like that. So I have a great team that actually keeps changing depending on which chemical we are working on. And these aspects will show up from the beginning if we know that, if we anticipate that some environmental justice issues are gonna show up.
Okay. Mark in Indiana had a little bit more specific question, talking about the family of alcohol ethoxylates. If a ionic and or non-ionic surfactant such as that would be considered a VOC. And part of this rose from a question he got from Eric Spector talking about composite vapor pressure, a mixture of methyl acetate and D-limonene.
As I said, I won't be able to answer questions that have anything to do with other aspects of the VOC, like pressure or, you know, types of volatility on the chemistry side. However, I think I alluded to the idea that any chemical that is not meeting the definition, as we put it later, which is compounds with carbon in them. Let me go to it if I can find it right now. And the easy way actually to that, here is the definition. So the definition is any volatile organic compound that is formed of carbon, excluding carbon monoxide, dioxide, carbonic acid, metallic carbides or carbonate, and ammonium carbonate, which participate in atmospheric photochemical reaction. That's why, to me, this is the easy answer. Any one of them is going to be a VOC unless it is in the list I'm going to show you in a moment if we have time. If it's not listed in that list, then it is a VOC if it meets these criteria I just put. We won't know whether it's not a VOC until we do the assessment and compare it to the KOH of ethane and the MAR of ethane. So that's the easy answer to it. So consider anything a VOC unless it's not in that list that you have in the CFR.
Yeah.
5100.
Yeah, and sort of related to that, Linnell is asking in Kansas, if an industry type received an exemption for a specific VOC from their state agency, it would be in the state SIP, and that does have to be approved by EPA, correct?
Yes.
And that's, if there is an exemption, then that would be through your group, correct?
Yes, I am the one who is the lead on this program. And as I said, doing pretty much everything, but with the help of an awesome group of scientists and experts in different fields, you know, as I showed the process.
Okay. All right. So yeah, any other questions? All right, hearing none, I certainly appreciate your time and your presentation today.
Don, if we have a couple of minutes, I want to show you. I'm going to try to see how I switch my screen now, and I am not sure how to do it. Let's get out of maybe the presentation, voila, and then how to go back to the other. I want to go to my computer, and since I'm sharing it, okay, so maybe here. Nope. Okay. Somehow.
You're still in the slideshow right now, so
I'm trying to get out of it because it's maybe, is it because it's full screen or?
Maybe.
Somehow it's not allowing me.
Are you able to exit out of the presentation?
I'm trying. Here we are. Maybe here, and then now I can stop sharing, which is not allowing me for some reason. Okay, here we are. Can you now see this?
Not currently. We're still seeing the presentation.
Okay. For some reason, it's not allowing me to share anymore. I wanted to take you through the different links. That's what I wanted to do. And even though it worked before, so let's see.
Let's see here.
Is it here?
All right.
It's not allowing me.
Progress now.
Huh?
That's a really neat picture, whatever that is.
It's beautiful. It's actually in Asheville, North Carolina. A lot of people don't know the Chimney Rock.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that place.
It's amazing. I can't, for some reason, is it how to end the show? Maybe end the show, right? Or
Yes.
here. Yeah, it's just, maybe it's stuck. So sorry. I'm going to my camera again, and here we are. Maybe here. Okay, can you see now? I can't see it, but can you see now the website or not?
No, we're still seeing your background screen.
It's strange. Honestly, I'm not very good with this Zoom. We use Team from Microsoft, so I'm not sure why it's not allowing me unless you can kind of take me out. All right. Is Nancy around? Maybe she can tell me because it's not allowing me anymore, and I wanted to show you different links. Okay. It looks like I wasn't. It's stuck. I think the computer.
Let me try this. Can you stop sharing screen?
It's not allowing me at all, unless I maybe.
I think since I'm host, I can get it to stop sharing your screen.
There we go, Allison.
So I can do it
there. All right. Now let's see if we can pull up the website.
Right. Maybe you can do it. It's just I had them ready, and maybe that's what kind of.
There we go. So there's at least the ground level ozone pollution page.
Right, and once you go to the right and down to the bottom, you're going to find the one for the exemption, the one that are related to ozone. The last link down there should be the one.
So yes, this is the EPA ground level ozone pollution page that has a lot of information about that. And then it does have the VOC exemptions and a direct link to the Code of Federal Regulations.
The bottom right, that's the last bullet. That's where, what are the ozone VOC exemption? And then that should take you to the main page where you can find the different links. The one for the code of Federal Register. I don't know if you can see that yourself. I can't see you anymore for some reason. And then by the end of the page, you can find both the July 1977 guidance, the early guidance, and then the interim guidance links. And then under VOC exemption rule, when you click down, click here, you will find all the most recent rules that we have. And under each rule, you will find a link to more details where you can find the final rule itself, when it was published, and even a docket for it. Then you can find also a fact sheet about it that gives you, in a nutshell, what the rule is about. Then on the top, though, you will see there's a link that gives you the full list. View a complete list of the VOC exemption rules. That's under revision to the regulatory definition of volatile compounds. And then right in the beginning, you have a list. And that takes you to the full list that I think Rhonda shared that before. And here where I wanted to show you a little bit about the history and what happened from the beginning and how, for example, in 1977, there was at least four rulings that were done. And then among them to the air quality guidance. In 2004, you will see the TBAC ruling that dropped the record keeping for that chemical, and it triggered actually the interim guidance for changes along with the review of the definition. I'm sorry I wasn't able, even though they were ready, unfortunately, as I said, it's just internet things.
Okay. You had great directions, and I was able to follow through as you were talking about them.
Because I can't see you anymore for some reason. And,
so yeah, we're currently on that complete list, and I scroll down to the September 13th, 2005. There was the addition of 6 to the VOC definition regarding the California aerosol coating rule.
right.
And yeah, it shows the complete history there. And then the page before that had a little bit more on that.
And this is some of the work that I am doing. I'm trying to build a little bit of history to write maybe a white paper about the process and how it evolved. And why also I wanted to give you maybe another piece of information that many of the chemicals in the list are PFAS. So this is another issue that is going to come up sometime soon. As you probably know, PFAS now are gaining interest. I think the Office of Research and Development is working on them right now. And I'm getting involved in trying to figure out which one of the ones we exempted are currently active PFAS. And this is by some of the companies that are producing these chemicals. They already listed some of their active chemicals that should be considered as PFAS. So there's a lot of stuff going on, you know, around the VOC, and I hope some other time we can have some updates, and I can follow up with you on more information as we get them.
And and in addition to several of these being PFASs, I think several of these are refrigerants. Like I'm looking at the 2333 tetrafluoropropene. Also known as HFO 1234YF. I think that is used in car refrigeration systems.
Yeah, a lot of them are refrigerants.
And I remember getting a call several years ago from a car manufacturer who was asking about, I think they were switching to that one because it had a lower greenhouse gas equivalency and would actually meet some of the European standards as opposed to what they had, but then they had a concern about flammability. So.
Right, we have different types of chemical, and as I said, this is the challenge because each time we get a petition, we have a totally different set of challenges, and this is good to know for people who are interested in exemptions, that the exemption will be really in parallel with whatever the chemical was accepted for. So the SNAP ruling is very important, and it works like our baseline. We pretty much base our exemption on those findings, whether toxic finding or acceptability for replacement to other chemicals.
Well, we certainly appreciate the presentation and certainly appreciate everybody's time today. Next month, what is our topic next month?
I don't have anything myself.
Okay, yeah, we were, I think, moving back and forth on that one. Because yeah, I think the aqueous-based cleaning got moved from that. So okay, we'll try and figure out what the subject is for next month then. Sorry about that. Anyways, again, we want to thank Dr. Benromdhane for her time and presentation. And if you have any questions, please email us and we may be able to get it answered. If not, we'll see you next month.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Benromdhane.
Benromdhane.
Benromdhane. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You don't have to be sorry. You don't need to know all the names in the world.
Try not to slaughter someone's name. Purposely, that is.